Alastair Post-Quinn is a member of Friends Meeting at Cambridge, and he is going to walk us through some of their process and tell us a little bit about how they've come to what they're using, some of their technology specifically. We know that that will not apply to everyone, but it might give you some ideas, and it's always interesting to find out what other meetings are doing. For the third of the program, I guess, second half, we're going to break into some groups with 5 or 6 people in them each and answer some very simple prompts about what you're finding as challenges and joys in this time. You're going to hear Alastair speak about a lot of technical things tonight. He has graciously provided us with a lot of different specifications and maps and charts of what he's using. And those also, pretty much everything you hear tonight, we're going to include in a follow-up email so you can pay attention without having to worry about writing things down specifically. And I'd also like to thank Kenneth Glover, who is serving as our prayerful elder tonight, also a member of the Mill City Quakers worship experiment. And due to us all being worried about the current state of things, he's in his place, I'm in my place, and Alastair is in his place, even though we were going to all be in the same room at one point. So we're already demonstrating some flexibility. So again, I'd like to welcome you all. And I think we're going to start with my inviting Alastair to tell us a little bit about where he is. And if you have any specific questions for me in the meantime, you can put them in the chat. I'll be mostly highlighting some of the different screens he's using, so you can use those as well. And you can always change those spotlights to see the gallery view in your own screen as well. Great. All right, let's get started. Alastair, I'm going to hand it over to you.
I've spotlighted myself. There we go. Hello, friends. I'm Alastair Post-Quinn. I am sitting in the meeting house at Friends Meeting in Cambridge, and I am a center resident here. So that in and of itself has helped get some of the technology up and running more quickly because I'm already on site. So I am here in the meeting house with the technology that the working group that I am clerking, the ad hoc technology working group at FMC, that group has discerned about and purchased and set up. And that the meeting has now been using up until Omicron hit, and we went back to Zoom again, for several months now. And we have been refining it, and I think we've got it to a pretty good, stable place. It's not perfect, but it is pretty good. A few caveats. This is something that works for our relatively large meeting house. You may not, if your space is smaller, need something quite as elaborate. But we're also trying to keep it as simple as we can. Just if for no other reason, then somebody has to, or some buddies have to operate it every Sunday morning. And so we want to make sure that it's as user-friendly as it can be. Still, it takes some training. And I'm going to give you a little tour of what exactly it is. And in order to do that, I'm going to switch cameras here. So give me a second. Switching. There we go. This is the ceiling of the meeting house. This is actually something we did. Sorry, it's a little blurry at the moment. It'll come in focus in a moment. But There we go. Voila. Yeah, so aside from the technology that we did, we also, you can't really see it very well, but we also coated the ceiling to reduce the reverberance of this quite large room. If you haven't been here before, it was quite echoey. So this is the cart, and I'm going to back up a little bit because I don't have a zoom in and out here function. So this is the cart, and as you can see, it consists of a laptop computer, a little bit of hardware, a projector. Projector is projecting our session on the wall. Yeah, I didn't hit the record thing, so. But the general idea here is that we have a microphone system. This is a wireless, there we go, wireless microphone system connected to a little box called a Scarlett 2i4, which does a couple of different things. One of them is that it converts audio signal into USB signal, which allows the laptop to use it as a Zoom input for the in place of a microphone. And it also allows us to do some rudimentary sound mixing so that we can go down to this speaker that's down here for amplification of folks on Zoom, as well as folks who are speaking in the meeting house with the wireless microphones. The wireless microphones allow people on Zoom to hear us. And the projector is fairly self-explanatory, but the other bit of this that's very important is this little guy sitting here on a table in the middle of the meeting house. This is a 360 camera. And what it does is it can see everybody in the meeting house. And if you look at the window that says Friends Meeting at Cambridge, you will see what it is currently outputting. Now it's a little dark because it is a, thank you, Kathleen. It is at night, we are at night here. So the lights that are in this room are sufficient, but not bright. And the Pana is actually, the Pana is the name of this particular camera, is currently set for the brightness of a morning meeting. It can be set with some tweaks to the software to be brighter, but I didn't have time to do that prior to this. But you get the idea. You can see that it's looking at me, and then there's also a 360-degree view of the meeting house below. And theoretically, if I were to move over here, it will point at me again. So anyone who stands and speaks within the meeting house theoretically should be able to be seen. And it also has a certain amount of verticality, so it will even go up to the balcony. I'm not going to run up there right now just to prove it, but we're not using the balcony at this moment, so it hasn't really been tested in that way. But while I was doing audio tests, it does actually point up at the balcony if somebody up there speaks. So that allows us to see anyone who stands and speaks. And all that goes to the laptop on the cart, and then projects up to the wall above the fireplace over here. So I am going to switch back to the other camera to reduce the nausea I'm sure some of you are feeling from me moving around with this thing. Give me one moment. There we are again. So there is one other piece of this that is currently not running, and that is the assisted listening devices. This meeting house is equipped with a set of assisted listening devices, which typically, prior to the Zoom era, have been fed by a set of hanging microphones in the ceiling. Currently, we're not using those for a number of reasons, but we have sort of retrofitted the system to take Zoom output from a separate device, which is just an Android tablet in this case. It can be literally anything that has a headphone jack on it. Anything that can do Zoom and has a headphone jack on it. So a phone would be all right. And that feeds into the assisted listening devices. The assisted listening devices allow folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, or mostly hard of hearing, to hear what is going on in the meeting house. Right now, what it allows them to do is hear anything that is happening on the Zoom session, which in this case is anyone speaking through Zoom and anyone speaking on the handheld microphones within the meeting house. We are still refining that system, but it seems to work pretty well. I do have a little block diagram that I can show if folks are interested. I'm going to, let's see here, remove this bit of the spotlight, and I'm going to try to share this block diagram. There we go. See if I can do this at full screen or not. There we go. So hopefully folks are able to see this. This is just a graphical representation of all of the stuff that I just said. And this will be available on the website that Kathleen alluded to. I also have a little training video that has a tour of the technology that we are using. So that's a little rundown of the technology. You can take a screenshot of this if you want, but again, this will be available for you for download later. And again, this is just the way we've done it, and we may yet refine it beyond this. So this, of course, requires a few things, a little bit of infrastructure that we had to put in. We had to make sure that the meeting house, which prior to our attempt to do this, didn't have Wi-Fi. So we had to get Wi-Fi coverage in here so that we could actually use this any kind of Zoom system. So that's another important bit that you got to keep in mind. For a large space like this, it's a bit of a challenge. Depending on your space, it may not be so much of a challenge. Oh, I've got a chat message from Betsy. Thank you, Betsy, for mentioning the folks that we have who join us and sit outside. We do have a group of people who sit outside, and that's especially useful. The assisted listening devices are especially useful for those folks because the speaker is not really loud enough for broadcast to the outdoors. It is not meant to be ear-splittingly loud. It's just meant to sound like somebody's speaking in meeting. So, so the assisted listening devices work especially well for folks who are who have chosen to sit outside during meeting. We have also do have 4 microphones, as you may have seen in the block diagram, that all work for this system. So typically the person, the spiritual host, has one. The mic spacer, the person who brings the microphone to anyone who stands to speak, has one. And we've also left one on a mic stand outside, should anyone outside decide to stand and speak. We are looking into other microphones and also hoping at some point to be able to reintegrate the hanging microphones, since the system already has microphones, since the room already has microphones built into it. If we could use those microphones again, that would be ideal, but we would not be able to amplify because huge feedback loop. I did just see a chat go by asking how we avoid feedback. Zoom does that all for us, for the same reason that you can have both your microphone and speaker on while you're using Zoom and it doesn't feedback. Zoom is processing both the input and output so that it doesn't feed back. Now, of course, if you get the microphone right up next to the speaker, that might be a problem, but typically, a person standing right in front of the cart where the speaker is will not have a problem with that. Any other questions? Kathleen, I haven't been constantly watching the chat. I just see things pop up. So.
Yep, I've been watching it a little bit. And some of these are great questions people are asking. I wanted to ask you 2 big questions, Alistair, and then remember that we also, for some of these small questions or smaller things you're putting in the chat, we're going to save them, and we also can probably, if we don't touch on them tonight, we can answer them later. I think we might. Alistair, I just wanted to ask 2 questions. One is, what has the thing that has been most surprisingly joyful to you in all of this? And what has been the biggest challenge thus far?
2 very good questions. Thank you. I think the most surprising joy of all of this has been how this has expanded our meetings reach. We are getting people involved with our community in ways that we had not been expecting and would not have been able to do pre-hybrid system. We have a robust community of folks who join us on Zoom, and people coming in from all over the country, including and all over the world. We have one regular attender who Zooms in from France, and so it's just really sort of opened up the meeting in unexpected ways, and it's just kind of wonderful to see that happen and continue to happen. I think the biggest challenge has really just been trying to meet everybody's expectations for it, because it isn't a perfect system, and there are still things that we would love to fix. One of the big ones that some of you might have either experienced if you have attended a meeting for worship here on Zoom or in person, is that because the 360 camera always points at the loudest sound in the room, if the speaker, and not the person speaking, but the actual speaker on the cart is amplifying somebody speaking in the room, the camera will point at the cart, not at the person. And there is nothing I can do about that in the current system. and we're working on some creative solutions. And it is one of the big sticking points. People would love to see the people who are standing to speak. If they are, folks on Zoom would like to see on the Friends Meeting at Cambridge window the person who is actually speaking and not just hear them. That's a challenge when we are amplifying both people on Zoom and people on the handheld microphones. We do, by the way, have a smaller system very similar to this on a smaller cart for a smaller room across the way, which we don't amplify because it's a smaller room. And so folks don't need to have their microphones amplified. Of course, the folks on Zoom come out of the speaker. That's the only way. There, the 360 camera actually works, quote unquote, as intended. So yeah, the challenges really are that everybody wants something a little different, and I have to balance all of that. But I think by and large, folks here are pretty happy with the way it works.
Alistair, the last question I think I'm going to ask you in this group setting before we move on is about the quality of worship. And I know that is a very, could have a lot of answers, but I'm just wondering from your perspective, like what your sense, either your personal sense or the sense of the meeting, or how is all of this? There's a lot of stuff here. And there's also a lot of good focus on worship and how that works. So what have you seen that in that realm?
Well, I think what I'd have to say is that just like any question asked to a group of Quakers, or honestly a group of anybody, you're going to get a wide variety of answers because everybody experiences that differently. I know that there are people who feel that the technology is disruptive or distracting. I know that there are people who are still perfectly fine to center down and are very happy to have all of the people that they wish were here in person but can't be for one reason or another still present with us. And then there are a lot of folks who are those people, the people who are too far away or too cautious in this uncertain time to be able or willing to come into the meeting house for worship and are still able to join us. I will say that we were tasked with finding a way to do this, but the meeting as a whole never properly discerned that this was something that we wanted to do. It sort of came out of a almost survival mode of thinking, where we were afraid that if we could not meet in some different way than Zoom, we might lose something critical to the continuance of our meeting. And I don't know, or I don't know whether that is true or not. I know that there are lots of meetings that still have not gone to any kind of hybrid setup, and I imagine some of you are parts of those meetings, and so and your meetings still meet and still thrive, I hope. But our meeting was really committed to coming back together in person in some way, while not leaving out those who couldn't. And that's why the hybrid system exists. It really is a connection between the folks who are meeting in person and the folks who are meeting on Zoom. Both things could happen on their own, but with the hybrid system, it can all happen together.
Thank you so much, Alistair. That's a lot of information to process and to use that is really helpful. If anyone else has something that came up in your group that maybe isn't a question for Alistair, but is just a question for the group, or, oh my goodness, we're doing this or whatever, feel free to ask that too. I'm going to take my spotlight off. So when you're speaking, it will go to you, or you can do gallery view. Okay, great. And I already see at least one question in the chat. Oh, Panda versus Owl. Oh yes, I love that question.
That's a good one.
Okay.
So all right, is spotlight off now? All right, great. So yeah, if you want to set yourself to speaker view, you're welcome to do that, or just keep us in the boxes. So somebody asked, Carol asked, how did you choose Panda versus Owl? So the Owl was something that we had been loaned an Owl for testing. So we had one and we tested it out. But I just I found a Pana for a pretty deep discount, and I just ordered it. And it happened to show up while we were doing the test on the Owl. So I got to run out, grab the box, unpack it, and put it up and do a side-by-side test with both devices at the same time. So we actually got to see how they both performed. And I will be honest, despite the fact that the Pana is a little more than half the price of the Owl, and frankly, is probably a Chinese knockoff. It outperforms the Owl in almost every way. It's clearer, it's faster, it's more customizable. The thing the Owl does that this doesn't do is the Owl is app controlled, which means that you can control it with a smartphone. This doesn't do that. And there are some other things that I'm hearing now that the Owl does. New firmware allows you to chain two Owls together, and I'm really curious about that. But for the moment, the Pana doesn't appear to have that capability. Further testing perhaps is warranted, but we're pretty happy with the Pana at the moment. We actually have two of them, one for either setup, because in many cases the setups have to be used at the same time. That said, I know a lot of people have chosen the Owl, and I don't have any reason to say that there's anything wrong with it. It's a perfectly good system. We just found that the Pana worked. The other thing that the Pana does better than the Owl is it can focus on voices that are much further away, which is great when you have a much larger room. The Pana can actually pick up people on the balcony, and not only in the balcony, but at the very back of the balcony. So as far away as possible from the Pana, it will still pick up voices and point at them. So that the Owl would not do. And as a matter of fact, when we tested the Owl, we were in a smaller room, and even the furthest corners there, it wouldn't pick people up. So I can't imagine it would be better here in the meeting house. For our particular use, the Pana is probably the best. For yours, it may not be. But yeah. Any other questions?
Follow-up question on that. Can you tell me how big your meeting space is, your worship space?
Oh, goodness. Kathleen, got a blueprint? What is the dimension of this place?
I believe it is 1,500 square feet.
Something like that.
I can go look that up.
30
actually.
by 50. 30 by 50 is probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, it has a very high ceiling. That's part of the height.
Yeah. Yeah, the ceiling's probably almost as tall as the building is wide. Not long, thank goodness, but wide.
I want to express gratitude for hearing the phrase blended. We've been using hybrid, and I found that refreshing and appreciated. And I would welcome either in the chat or people quickly commenting on the struggle about having a visual screen in the meeting room as opposed to just the question of being able to hear one another on Zoom and in person. We have not found unity to have a screen up on the wall yet. That feels more invasive to people than sound. So I wonder how others have done with that. But again, thank you for the word blended.
I understand that the word blended is heavily used in the UK meetings, but it's also something we've heard here. It's something we considered using, but for one reason or the other, hybrid ended up being the term. I do like blended as well. How about three-dimensional holograms? Somebody put in the chat. I hear your question about the screen. You're right. Even if the cart itself was not not considered a distraction, the screen most certainly is. And I think we have a variety of opinions on that, as you can imagine. Some people would prefer, yeah, there we go. Some people would prefer to not have the distraction. And, you know, in a normal meeting, this would, sorry, it's got an error message again. Oops, oh dear, I didn't want to do that. There we go. So a normal meeting, it would just be showing a grid, which means that even if somebody is speaking, you can't really see any great detail because it's just a little square, even on a very large screen. A little square from across the room is still not going to help you see very well who it is that's speaking. And there is, by the way, no easy way for us to do a speaker view on this and go back to gallery view afterwards without quite a bit of distraction during meeting as somebody messes with a laptop. So there is, by the way, somebody who we have hired now. It used to be me. We have now hired somebody who operates this system. Messes with volume a lot of the time because there's quite a variety of soft spoken versus louder voices, and we have to tweak the volume to make sure that it's manageable. So let's see. Some other messages have come in.
If I could speak to the.
Yes.
I'm Sue from Charlotte Friends in North Carolina. We chose not to do. We had the projector for a long while, and we chose to go to a TV screen. It's probably about 45-inch TV screen, and it's kind of set up we're in like a square. Basically, we have two sides facing two sides for chairs. So we kind of have it in one of the corners, kind of almost like it's like another human presence-ish. So it does, we're trying it so it's not, you know, if you want to look at the person on speaker view when they're speaking on Zoom, you can, and if you don't, then you can just have your back or side to the screen. It seems to work somewhat well. We just have a laptop that I manage that I can go back and forth. So it's a little different setup than what you have, but we, you know, made that choice to, because it's a small meeting, to not have the projector, but have a TV. So a little bit less presence, but still there. So
Yeah.
those two different options.
Yeah, and we could absolutely do that. We do have a TV of similar size that we could bring in and do that with. But we also do have a small number of benches that that if one were sitting on them, they could not easily see the screen, like the one that I'm sitting on right now. As you can see, I've got my back to the screen. I can't see it unless I do that. So, but I've definitely, we definitely have a number of people who really don't. They just don't pay attention to the screen. A lot of folks will go through a meeting with their eyes closed anyway, so the screen doesn't make that much of a difference to them. And we also have an issue where, you know, as I think I alluded to before, the view of the meeting house always points at the cart, because the speaker will always be the loudest thing in the room, regardless of whether somebody is speaking here on a microphone or speaking through Zoom. And so in most cases, the voice coming out of the speaker does not necessarily have anything to do with what's on the screen. So it's not a perfect solution. So let's see here. I'm just checking the chat here. First day school. Yeah, that's outside of my purview. I'm not sure exactly how that's being done. First day school is not using one of our hybrid systems, but they are by and large doing in-person stuff when we are doing hybrid. When we are all back on Zoom, as we are now, they have a different kind of virtual programming that I have nothing to do with, I'm afraid. So
I'll also add that at Cambridge, there's at different times during the month, there's also an intergenerational worship, which is blended. And it kind of depends on, we're working that out. How many kids, how many places, how many kids want to be in person, how many kids would rather be on Zoom. So that's a learning as well.
I see Jim from San Antonio mentions 2 different meetings. That's something that has come up here as a possibility, but the logistics of that are just beyond us at the moment. One meeting hybrid, one meeting not. We've also got some folks who Zoom in with us who are very, very adamant that that as much as possible happen hybrid, so that they feel as connected to the community as they possibly can, because they're unable to be here any other way. And so there's a lot of difference of opinion on you know, whether anything that we can do should ever not be hybrid again. So definitely it's definitely a changing landscape. I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling back in the chat to see if I missed anything, and I did, it seems. Did you consider having someone turn the camera to whomever is speaking rather than automatically turning camera? Yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the strengths of the OWL, that the PANA doesn't give us the ability to do. The OWL, since it is app controlled, you can have somebody on a smartphone controlling the thing and pointing it at people. I'm not sure how disruptive that would be, but since we already have somebody who is operating the equipment on the cart, it's certainly a possibility. And unfortunately, the PANA doesn't allow us to do that. So, or at least because the PANA operates through the laptop and not through an app, it can do it, but the person would have to get up and mess with the laptop, which is more disruptive than somebody fiddling with a smartphone, I think. Do tech operators feel as though they can also experience meeting for worship as worship? And I would say, as somebody who did this for the first several months of us using this, not really. It's very difficult. I have, in 1 or 2 cases, been able to fully center down. Cases where there hasn't been a lot of other activity, so I didn't have to do very much with the system, but very rarely. And this is one of the reasons we hired somebody to do the job who has been involved with our community but isn't deeply involved, and so he doesn't feel like he's missing out quite as much as I did. Let's see. Do you use a waiting room? No, we don't use a waiting room. Not for this, not for meeting for worship anyway.
I'll add also that there is a tech person, I believe, who is a Zoom tech host, as well as someone who is a tech host in the room. And
Yeah.
I think that is something that is probably really helpful. If there's Zoom things going on, people can chat to the Zoom tech host and, figure out those things. The person in the room isn't like typing away all the time.
Yeah, that's a holdover from our Zoom only times pre-hybrid, when we had a tech host and in many cases a second tech host and tech host 2, to back each other up, especially for large meetings. And now we have usually just one tech host and the AV host, who is the person operating the cart and its hardware. They can connect with each other. If the tech host notices something that the AV host needs to deal with, audio weirdness or something like that, they can chat with each other about that. But yeah, it's a really good idea to have somebody who's not in the meeting physically, but is on Zoom and can deal with technical issues that come up for people without disrupting the meeting to do it. Pamela asks, when standing to speak, has the custom included a person saying their name to be known across in-person and hybrid meeting for worship? No, not as such. I think that might be a good idea, but at the moment, we haven't been doing that.
I'm going to take note of the time. We're just coming up to 8:30, and I'd love to have just a few minutes of worship before we close. I want to remind everyone that because you registered for this meeting, I have your email. So I'm going to send you in the next 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, actually, a video of this and a link both to a web page where resources will be listed, and also some other things. A number of folks have asked about whether we can do these tech chats more regularly, and I'd love to do that. This is all an experiment. And myself and a few other people that I know, Kenneth and a few of us, are happy to do these. And that's kind of where that is. So you'll get all our contact information and all of those things. So if it's all right with you, I'd love to just close with a few minutes of worship. Thank you, friends. It's been wonderful to be with you tonight.
Thank you very much.